Welcome to the Creative Ops Compass podcast, your navigation system for turning creative chaos into strategic impact. My name is Jesse Krinsky. I'm a creative operations consultant and the founder of InFocus Consulting. I help in-house creative teams streamline workflows, improve stakeholder relations, and elevate their role as strategic partners. Building an in-house studio can be one of the biggest investments a creative team ever makes. But getting leadership to say yes requires more than showing them pretty renderings and listing technical specs. You need to speak their language, and that means connecting your ask to what actually matters to the business.
So if you just keep asking yourself, in order to do what? In order to do what? Usually that helps take you to what will resonate most with your leaders.
My guest today is Lauren Jensen. She is the Vice President of Growth and Partnerships at Provost Studio, a company that designs broadcast studios and branded spaces for major corporations. Lauren helps creative teams navigate the complex process of winning approval for a studio, from building the business case through execution and beyond. In this episode, Lauren and I talk about how to decide whether building even makes sense in the first place, how to avoid the most common budgeting mistakes, what it takes to get facilities and IT on your side, and what comes after the studio is built that most teams don't expect. Whether you're just starting to think about a studio or you're already deep into the approval process, this conversation will help you move forward with more clarity and confidence. Let's get into it. Lauren, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Jesse. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see you again.
So one of the first questions in-house creative teams wrestle with when they're thinking about video production is whether they should build their own studio or continue renting space and working with external crews. So how should teams make that choice in the first place?
It's a great question. So I would say first you want to look at your primary use cases. What are the most important use cases that you're doing the most frequently and that are driving business impact? And most frequently, I would say those probably involve leadership and maybe it's the CEO speaking. If you are having to rent a facility and go somewhere else, how often are you really able to do that? Is that working well with the CEO's schedule? Are you able to film the CC team as often as you would like to? That's kind of the biggest question. And how much
one of those intangibles, the intangible benefits is the convenience of it.
Yes, and that makes a really big difference, actually. While we say that the size of the studio is the most important thing is getting the biggest studio you possibly can. The second most important, though, is where is it located? Because you could have a very large space, but if it is not convenient for your CEO and your C-suite and executives to go to frequently, they are not going to go to it as often as you would like.
Okay, so assuming a team has decided that building makes sense for them, what happens when they start approaching leadership? What pushback do they typically encounter?
What we usually see sometimes is if you already have some kind of existing space or there's, an existing building, sometimes leadership doesn't understand how large of a space is needed and how much of an investment needs to happen into it. So sometimes you get boxed into something that's a little bit too small and you're told to just make do if you can. But what we often help our clients to do and advise them to do is show examples of what others are doing. Show examples of aspirationally where you would like your production levels to be, and then help tie that into what the missing needs are for you in that studio. For example, a lot of the time, how many people you can accommodate on camera or around a table is tied directly to the space, how many different shoot-off areas you can have, how many different camera angles. Everyone wants flexibility and versatility, but those really, really come from the size of the space. So that's the biggest thing, is to advocate for the biggest space you possibly can.
So teams know they need to advocate for space. They know they'll face pushback. They know they need to show examples. But I think one of the hardest parts for creatives is actually communicating why the studio matters in language that leadership truly understands, or what the value of it is. So how do you help creative teams with that translation?
So something I like to help others think through is asking the same questions several times on purpose, because it takes you closer to the top line answer. And that is, in order to what? In order to what? Because you might start off with something very technical that your leaders are not going to understand. Like, we want 1080p, we want this, we want 3 cameras. In order to do what? And then so that we can film more things. In order to what? So we can generate more content for you. In order to what? To reach these different target markets that you're trying to penetrate. In order to what? Revenue. It almost always needs to tie back to revenue, or growing some type of numbers, whether that's profitability, memberships, clients, that sort of thing. So if you take it 2 or 3 steps back and just keep asking yourself, in order to do what? In order to do what? Usually that helps take you to what will resonate most with your leaders. The other part of that, I would say, is I'm a big fan of mirroring language. So listen to what your leaders are saying in their different departments, because your facilities lead might speak differently than your marketing lead. Listen to the themes of what they're talking about and try to mirror your need back in that language to them. That's a lot of the time the best way to do things. Always think about your audience, just like with production.
It's funny. My 5-year-old does the same thing. He'll ask, why?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But there's something to that, because certainly sometimes he is just being difficult. But other times what he wants to understand is the real reason behind the thing that I'm telling him to do.
Yes.
And even though it's frustrating for me when he keeps asking why, what he often just wants to understand is the core reason for this, the thing that I need from him. And that sounds similar to what you're suggesting here, is by constantly saying, in order to do what, you get the creatives out of their own bubble.
Yeah.
But to your other point about mirroring, creatives first need to understand what it is that they are mirroring. And so they're not just repeating back, but actually understanding. So what advice do you have for creatives to actually understand what business needs are in order to connect the investment of, in this case, a studio, to those needs?
Mm-hmm. I would say, if you're already listening to things like the quarterly internal reports or stand-ups, listen to the CEO and see what are the top 3 things that your CEO is talking about. What are their strategic priorities, and what are the other business leaders talking about? The more that you can tie the need for a studio, for better content production, to what the top 3 priorities of the organization are, not just for the next year, but even the next 5 to 10 years, the stronger that your case will be. If it is something that you help articulate as being intrinsically tied to achieving those goals, it just becomes an indisputable fact that you need to make this investment.
I love that. One thing that I often recommend creative teams do is to read through in detail their company's most recent annual report. Mm-hmm. I often say that annual reports are boring gold mines. They tell you in black and white what matters to leadership, how they're going to be measuring the value of the teams across the company. So start with that, and if it's a little too dense, even put it into Perplexity or Claude or whatever your LLM is, and say, we're an in-house creative team. Here's our company's 10K. What are some learnings from this that can help us make the case for this or that, or how do we better connect the work we are doing to the business needs? What are some mistakes that you often see in-house creative teams make when they're pitching a studio investment?
So a mistake that we've seen a lot is thinking that you can come in and ask for something smaller than what you need, and then that makes it more palatable, and that'll get you to a yes. That's not accurate really at all. Sometimes, you're afraid sometimes asking and advocating for a studio could be a once in a career opportunity for you, and you're afraid. So you want to ask for a smaller amount or a smaller ballpark. And that is a mistake. It is very hard once you have thrown out some kind of a ballpark figure to leadership to then backtrack and add to it. As early as you can, start talking to other potential partners and experts to, figure out what you might be missing. Whatever your original idea is for the budget, you might want to try to double it, because you're thinking about not just scenic, but also lighting, and AV and technology. And this investment needs to last you for the next, 5 to 10 years. Whatever it is that you ask for and gets built at this time, it will be very difficult to change it. This is, you've got one shot, and the most successful creative teams I see really figure out what it is that they need up front by talking to others, talking to peers, talking to partners, and not being afraid to ask for those higher ballpark numbers, because the reality is leadership will always probably want to negotiate and try to talk you down. But the higher and more realistic your original starting point, the easier that process will be. If you've already painted yourself into a corner by giving a really low number, that's when it becomes much more of a challenge with the teams that we've helped, for sure.
Going back to the topic of communicating the value of the studio, what are some ways that you found to be effective for in-house teams to address the question of ROI, especially if they're not used to thinking in that way?
So that's always a tricky one, right? A lot of time we encourage our partners to start thinking about it with the tangible and the intangible, because some things are going to be very difficult to quantify. And similar to what we talked about before, in order to what? In order to what? If you simply say this will increase efficiency, every single product or tool out there says that. That's not enough of a reason to get someone to say yes to this project. So usually what we're looking at, though, does tie into efficiency, but you always want to tie it into numbers. So it's things like this will help us produce 3 times as much content. So instead of producing 10 hours of content a week, maybe we're going to be producing 30 hours now. It will reduce our reliance on outside costs and by 20 to 50%. It will enable us to make this many more types of content, or to help this many more departments, or this many more use cases. Because a lot of the time you're probably having to pick and choose who you're able to help and which use cases you prioritize in your organization. The more that you can maximize the efficiency of your workflow, the more all those different numbers will add up. The other side of that efficiency and ROI question is if you're going to be working with executives, their time is absolutely money. Their time is precious. And so the more that your studio is set up to be flexible and versatile, and you can get a bunch of different content made in the same day quickly, it makes a great use of their time, and that really speaks to the ROI as well.
I want to talk a little more about the less exciting side of getting a studio built, which is the approval process and all the frustrations that go along with it. So I know from having done this, it can be a very long process and it can be really frustrating. And so what are some things that teams can do to avoid some of the delays, at least the unnecessary ones along the way?
So one of the things that we advise is start building your business case long before you think you need it. As soon as you've identified that you think your team would benefit from a new studio, you don't have to wait until someone says go. You can start building that business case, because it's really an iterative process. It will keep evolving as you and the organization evolve. You don't want to wait until all of a sudden you have a new CEO announced and you weren't aware of it, and now they're in and now they want changes, and now you're going to start building your business case. If you can start doing that early and ahead of time, just casually engaging partners in the space to help you with that, and expecting for that process to be iterative and have updates and changes over time. So you're not going to get your business case right from the very beginning. It's sort of like, I suppose, maybe a research paper. That's what we see the most successful teams doing.
What are your thoughts about internal partnerships and the relationships that the creative teams need to have in order to move this along? Because it's not just leadership, right? They also need facilities to be on their side, and IT.
Absolutely. I would say as soon as possible, start trying to get to know the names of your key people in facilities, in IT. The stronger those relationships are in an authentic way, and the more you understand what their priorities are and what they're working on, I think the better aligned you can be to get your project over the line. Because the reality is that facilities may be working on a few other projects that they prioritize as much higher than yours. It might be the entire move of the building. It might be an entire remodel. It might be a whole new wing of campus. And to them, what you're talking about is a small piece of it. So just kind of trying to think of things from their perspective, ask them what's important to them and what helps them to be successful in their role, and try to help frame and bring all the information to the table ahead of time. Just the earlier you can make those friends and keep them abreast of what's going on, the better the outcomes will be. We just had an on-site visit with a new client, and they had done the work of befriending and having a close relationship with facilities from the beginning. And we had a great on-site visit with them and their facilities and their procurement. And it felt like the ideal scenario where people want to help you, right? But you have to also think, how can I be helping them back? So think about how you can make those collegial relationships reciprocal.
And jumping off of the first point you made, when creative leaders are going around the company, talking with various stakeholders and getting ideas from them about what they could possibly use the space for, it sounds like that's also an opportunity to get interest, excitement, and get champions for this around the company while they're trying to get the buy-in from leadership as well. If you can get excitement and interest from this around the company, from leaders of various departments, that can only, I imagine, help make the case.
Absolutely. Just the way I frame those conversations is thinking about what's in it for them, what's in it for me. So when you're going and you want to tell your marketing team or your people team about the studio, go ahead and start thinking about why it might help them and what might matter to them. And getting them excited will help you, because again, it all comes back to determining the space. That's like the most important consideration that comes. And oftentimes, if you are moving buildings or moving spaces, you're going to end up in a little bit of a tug of war over that space, right? Someone says, no, I want this space for this. I want this thing next to it for this. Well, we would like a control room. We need a hair and makeup room. But the more that they see why this studio will benefit them and what they're doing at the organization, their role. So I think of it at the organizational, departmental, and role level. How will this help this person? The more you can have people on your side who are like, you know what, I think it does make sense and we can move that room and you can have those two spaces next door.
Sure. But all of that, building relationships with facilities, getting stakeholders excited, making the case to leadership, let alone overseeing the actual design and building of a studio, it takes a lot of time. So what's some advice you have for creative leaders who know the value of the studio and who understand it, but are overwhelmed with the idea of trying to manage that while also managing all their day-to-day responsibilities?
I really understand that for sure. I would say reaching out to peers in your industry, in your community, and seeing who has done this before and asking them what did they learn through the process, getting their advice on what worked well and maybe what didn't work as well. I think that can be one of the most invaluable things. At the same time, just if you think about it, if you block off just maybe an hour a week to think about it, and continue to update your business case, by the time your organization is ready, you will be ready to jump at that moment. That's really the advice I would have.
So let's talk about some of that more fun stuff for a sec. What are some of the more exciting technological advances and tools that are available now for in-house studios that weren't, 5-10 years ago? Or even 10 years ago is a millennium now at this point, but 2-5 years ago.
Absolutely. I think that in the corporate world, we are just starting to scratch the surface of using XR for business cases and communications. We've seen it a lot with things like the Super Bowl.
XR?
Oh, yes. So XR, we say it stands for extended reality. So a mix of, augmented virtual reality. And it's when you have in-camera visual effects that the viewer would see, but that you in person may not see yourself. So that's something we're using more and more. You see it sometimes on the news with virtual weather sets, or in sports when different statistics pop up, plays, that sort of thing. I think in the next few years, we're going to be seeing more and more of that in the corporate space. It is a great way to visualize and communicate complex topics, complex data, to break it down. And it always helps with your messaging when you're on air talent is able to interact with something and see what they're working with. A lot of the time, tying it into having an LED virtual production environment helps a lot more than a green screen where someone can feel a little bit lost and not engaged in what's around them. When you can see the background and where you are, it helps you be more present and in the moment, and it creates better content.
So in order to run a studio like that, especially one that is using XR and that has a lot of moving pieces to it, there's the technology, but also we need the people who can operate it, who can run it well, who can troubleshoot things go wrong. How does that fit into the calculus of building a studio and planning for it? And there's the investment of the hardware of the space, but also of the people to operate it. How should creative leaders be thinking about that aspect of it?
So creative leaders should absolutely be thinking about building a new studio or upgrading their studio as a transformation project. And what that means is that your team will likely need to change their workflows. They will need to upskill. They will need to adjust to a new way of doing things. So the earlier you broach that topic openly with everyone and start to develop a plan for upskilling, or whether it is you need to hire more talent or have partners, whether they're in-house or outside, that's what we recommend.
All right. So let's say the studio is finally done. The team has gone through this whole process. They've fought for the space, gotten the budget, executed the build. What happens next that they might not be expecting?
So one thing we always prepare our clients for is this notion of build it and they will come. A lot of the time you think you know what your use cases are, but once you've built your studio, other departments are going to want to start coming to you and they will have ideas. And that's a wonderful thing, but try to prepare as much for that in advance as you can. Go ahead and start talking more to your marketing, your comms team, maybe your people team. Let other people know what's going on so they can contribute their ideas, while you still want it to be a space that is going to function best for your group. If you're thinking about the overall needs of the organization, just be prepared for more use cases than you were expecting. Once it is there and people see it, they will want to make use of it, which is a wonderful thing.
I love that. That absolutely. It's the flashy side of this is the studio, but in order for it to make it real or to get it, people need to understand the human side of this. You need to understand that you're working with people and you need to get their buy-in. But in order to do that, you actually need to genuinely understand and care about what their needs are in order to be able to speak to them in ways that will resonate with them. Absolutely. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it and love the insights you gave into what is often a very opaque and confusing and overwhelming process for a lot of creatives when they start this. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
One of the things Lauren emphasized in our conversation is that building a studio isn't really about the technology at all. It's about understanding people. Understanding what motivates your CEO when you're asking yourself, in order to do what, again and again. Understanding what facilities is juggling when they tell you the space isn't available. Understanding what your marketing team actually needs so you can frame the studio as solving their problems, not just yours. That's why the biggest mistake creative teams often make isn't underestimating the cost of cameras or lighting equipment. The biggest mistake is actually asking for too little because they're afraid. But remember what Lauren said. You get one shot. Leadership will probably try to negotiate you down from your initial ask, and whatever you build needs to last 5 to 10 years. So start with what you actually need and make the case for it. Don't negotiate against yourself. And if you do get it built, be ready for what comes next. Other departments will see the studio and suddenly have ideas. That's not such a problem if you've been building those relationships all along, talking to marketing and communications and HR about how the studio could serve them too. Because in the end, building an in-house studio is more about organizational transformation than cameras and creativity. And transformation is always about people first. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know what creative ops challenges you're facing. What topics would help your team work better? And if you work with in-house teams, whether you're an agency partner, a stakeholder, or a freelancer, I'd love to hear your perspective too. Reach out through the contact info in the show notes. Thanks for listening.